How to plan a wedding on a small budget. Wedding on a small budget ideas. According to The Knot, the average wedding cost is $33,931, and that doesn't include the honeymoon. Does that number make your head hurt? It makes mine hurt. What if you only have a budget of $1,000, $5,000, or $10,000? Does that mean your wedding won't be as good or as special? At the end of the day, the budget doesn't dictate how wonderful the wedding is. The couple does. How much fun people have at a wedding is determined by the little touches you make that day. So, how do you plan a wedding on a small budget? In this blog post, I am sharing over 20 tips to have a traditional wedding that's special and customized, no matter the size of your budget. I've included examples from my own wedding on a small budget with recommendations, mistakes, and solutions. But first, let's address the elephant in the room. What is actually the cheapest way to have a wedding? What is the cheapest way to have a wedding? When you or your friends and family think of a budget-friendly wedding, you all probably think courthouse wedding. Yes, these are the cheapest types of weddings you can plan. But a courthouse wedding is not the only way to stick to a budget when planning a wedding. You can have a traditional wedding filled with all the classics like walking down the aisle, enjoying good food, dancing, all without breaking the bank. So yes, even though a courthouse wedding is technically the cheapest, it's not what we are focusing on in this blog post. How to plan a wedding on a small budget. As I've said, it is 100% possible to plan a wonderful wedding on a small budget. Want to have photos to remember the day by? No problem. Want to sit down and enjoy a meal with the people you love? Let's make it happen. So here are 20+ ways to plan a wedding on a small budget. 1. Determine your wedding budget. Before you run off and start getting quotes, I get it, you're excited. You need to have an idea of what is attainable based on what you can afford. Here are ideas for how you can estimate your budget. Look at your savings and investment accounts. Ask your parents if they're willing to contribute. Keep in mind, if your parents contribute, they might expect to have a say in how the wedding is run. Estimate what monetary gifts you're likely to receive. Be conservative with this estimation because it's not guaranteed. If you have a family member who recently got married and you're inviting similar people to your wedding, you could ask them how much they received roughly per person. When you have a ballpark figure, have a long discussion with your partner about what you feel comfortable spending. Your final answer is your budget. I do want to give some friendly advice here though. It's important to remember that your wedding is just one day. It's a big day, but you don't have to throw everything you have at it to make it fun and memorable. 2 things about a wedding budget. 1. If you need to organize your budget, here's my wedding planner spreadsheet, which includes a wedding budget. It has space for all of the information, a summary and a chart so you can quickly see the big picture as well as the details. 2. If your wedding budget number is not quite where you'd like it to be, here are articles on how to make more money to add to it. If you prefer to use a paper budget, here's a minimalist wedding planner printable. Since it's a printable PDF, you can just print off the pages you need. There are 108 pages to choose from. 2. Prioritize what's important. The way to stay within a small wedding budget is to prioritize what's important. Here's how you can start prioritizing. Think about the previous weddings you've been to and identify the top 3 things you love the most. Discuss what elements are nice to have but not entirely necessary. Pinpoint what things you just don't care for so you can skip them completely. Here are the typical wedding categories you can talk through to get you started. Venue, food and beverages, cake or other dessert, photography and/or videography, entertainment, either DJ band, dress and tuxedo, rings, invitations, honeymoon, wedding planner, decorations, either flowers, candles, lighting, centerpieces, signage, favors. 18 tips on how to save money on an engagement ring. 3. Don't be afraid to have the wedding you want. It's natural to want to have the big, glamorous weddings you see on television. Fundamentally, the wedding is a day to celebrate the couple's commitment to each other. The strength of the union is the same whether it's at the Plaza Hotel or in the middle of the street. Don't give in to society's expectations. Also, don't give in to your relatives' expectations. I know what it's like to go to a relative's wedding and feel like you have to at least do what they did. Or maybe you're feeling the pressure from your mother or mother-in-law to have a certain type of wedding. The only type of wedding you should have is the one you want. Don't be afraid to stand up to those around you who feel otherwise. It's not their wedding. Your wedding should reflect you and what you feel comfortable spending. How much you budget doesn't make the wedding memories more special. You don't have to do all of the usual traditions like throwing the bouquet. Be your different self. If they gossip behind your back, that just reflects their character and not yours. 4. Be your own wedding planner. While planning a wedding can be daunting and it's nice to be able to hand this off, it's something you will realistically want to handle yourself when planning a wedding on a small budget. Seriously, doing this will save you thousands of dollars. But after having planned my own wedding, I can tell you it's not easy. On the day of, there were a lot of details I didn't realize would go wrong, like the tables were not set up according to the table layout provided, so the table numbers were incorrectly placed. It rained on my wedding day, and the wedding venue staff member was supposed to redirect people to the new ceremony location, but it was never done. But, at the end of the day, this is still something you'll want to manage yourself to save the money. Don't be afraid to ask family members or friends for help with this on the day of as well, as I'm sure they'd be happy to lend you a hand. Just make sure you've thought about some of the possible problems you might run into, and have a game plan ready to go. If you've never planned a large event before, you might find these best-selling wedding budget planners and books on Amazon helpful. After what happened to me, I wish I would have looked through resources like these ones beforehand. 5. Focus on the highest cost, the wedding venue. Banquet halls that are known as wedding venues will often have a large price tag. For example, there might be unexpected costs for setup, cake cutting, power for your DJ, corking alcohol, etc. I also recommend getting quotes from alternate venues to compare. Some ideas of where you can look include farms, parks, beaches, libraries, museums, aquariums, zoos, universities and schools, theaters, breweries, courthouses, community center, community hall. Another alternative is having the wedding at your home. If you go with a relatively blank space that requires you to bring everything from tables and chairs, your rental costs can add up quickly. You need to factor these in when you're comparing venues. If you'd like to trim the price down even further, consider looking within your network of friends and family, who probably have connections to amazing venues at a lower price or ideas of where you can look. Don't be afraid to ask around for recommendations. Here are a few additional tips on keeping costs down for your wedding venue. Time your wedding during off-season. The typical wedding season is June-October, which means it's not only more expensive to get married during this period, but vendors will be booked up quickly, so you'll have less room to negotiate. It's cheaper to book your wedding between November-May, aka the off-season. Don't have your wedding on a Saturday. Have it on a Friday or a Sunday. If you prefer to have a Saturday-type wedding, you can schedule it for a long weekend Sunday, which is what we did, and it was so much cheaper. Have a breakfast or lunch wedding. Not only will this bring down the cost of the meal, but it might bring down the cost of the venue as well. Wedding venues can easily break the budget. There is always the option to elope. You can host a more casual, small wedding reception when you return so you still celebrate with family and friends, but don't bear the huge cost. Tip: if you have guests that need high chairs, check to see if your venue has these available, or if you'll have to rent them and factor this cost in. This was something I did last minute because I didn't have kids at the time and didn't realize kids would need high chairs. I paid ridiculously high rental costs for high chairs. Be mindful of the second largest cost: wedding food and drink. The traditional 3-course, plated meals are often the most expensive option. But don't worry. This doesn't mean your dreams of enjoying a nice meal with your guests has to get tossed out the window. When discussing with the venue or caterer, look into buffet or family-style meals. Not only will this give your guests more variety, it'll be more satisfying and filling for the ones who are often still hungry after a 3-course meal. You could also use food trucks as they're often a good deal. For alcohol, you can bring your own beer and wine. Groupon for Wine Insiders has a great deal on premium wine. Another option which I mentioned above was to opt for a breakfast or lunch meal instead, which will present plenty of cost options. Suffice it to say, there are plenty of ways to save costs on the food and drink at your wedding. Skip the traditional wedding cake. A traditional wedding cake can easily cost over $300 at a wedding cake store. I've even seen cakes sell for more than $1,000. You can nix the wedding cake altogether and just have desserts available. My sister-in-law did this and it worked out great. She asked a few family members to make their famous desserts. It added a nice personal touch to the wedding. Another idea is to DIY cupcakes, which is what we did. You could do the same thing with cake pops. Here are some other ideas. Ask a family member or friend to make the cupcakes. You can buy them the mix and frosting. If you don't know anyone who's a baker, you can contact local bakeries or grocery stores. Even Walmart sells custom wedding cakes. For cheaper options, buy a cupcake stand or cake pop stand, which you can resell afterwards. I got this clear acrylic cupcake stand. It made the cupcakes look great. When I posted it for sale after the wedding, someone asked if they could just rent it, so I charged them a rental fee. When I got it back afterwards, I sold it. I ended up making money on this stand. Negotiate with vendors. Negotiation can be scary. I know the feeling firsthand of thinking that if you try to negotiate, you might offend the vendor and he or she might not be willing to work with you, or worse, they will give you poor service or product delivery. The key to negotiating is to be tasteful about it. You're dealing with a professional who has set their rates carefully based on their services and experience. So, the key to getting a yes is to treat them respectfully. The best way to have a successful negotiation is working out a win-win scenario. Here are some examples of how you can do that. Photographers. When you ask them for their quote, make sure you've worked out what you need or envision receiving from that vendor. What exactly is included and not included in the quote the vendor provides. For example, if you're dealing with a photographer, the quote should include the number of hours serviced, edited pictures, non-edited pictures, etc. Visit shopmommoneymap.com for more information.